Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of this week's History and a Drink. I'm Shawn.
And I'm Frank, and tonight we're going to be, in the honor of Valentine's Day, looking at some different love stories in American history.
Excellent. So, and love can be lots of different things. So one of the things, obviously, that we do, we're at the world-famous Bahi Hut, which we're every week, and we try to focus on one of their drinks. And one of their great drinks tonight, love can be a little bit hot. So we actually have tonight one of the lovely Volcano bowls, which actually gets lit here on fire.
Maybe.
There it goes. It's lit. It's going.
Right,
look at that there. It's hard to tell in the flame, but it's got flames. You get little sparks behind it there. Look at that. Fancy. And love, like I said, can be nice and warm. Delicious, delicious. So, for all of our audience here tonight, sharing with us tonight, it's absolutely delicious. We'll blow it out there so it don't catch on fire. So, we're going to talk about love on this Valentine's Day. And we have a bunch of different love stories, actually 5 different love stories to talk about. And love can be different things. Love can be sweet. A love affair can be sad. It can be spicy. It can be funny, and it also can be just about a couple that are just drawn together. So let's talk about those things. What do we got going on?
All right, so let's start with sweet.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to go all the way back to the beginning of our country, and we're going to look at John and Abigail Adams. And they're one of my favorite couples in history. They were married very young. They were married for 54 years.
Mm-hmm.
And she was one of the most important people in his life. Now, there's a historian named Joseph Ellis, and he found a treasure trove of over 1,200 of their letters back and forth to each other.
Wow.
And I have a book that has some of them in it, and the relationship that the two of them had, you can tell that it was based on love, that it was based on respect. They were both very intellectual and could talk about anything from politics of the time to the running of the farm and all that kind of stuff, and they really were equals. And it showed that, especially during his time as president, he had to fill big shoes. He's president number 2 after George Washington,
Right.
And back then the law said that whoever came in second place in the Electoral College was the vice president.
So the person you're running against, you're right, your opponent is all of a sudden now working for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Or your boss.
Yeah, or working against you the whole time. And that's really what happened to John Adams. Jefferson was a horrible vice president for him, did everything in his possibility to make his life miserable. And so he didn't really have the ability to create his own cabinet either, because all of these guys on his cabinet were picked by George Washington. How do you fire George Washington's guys and put your guys in?
Yeah.
So truly, Abigail was his only true
confidant, his cabinet
advisor. Yeah. And they could talk about anything, and she would give him tons of advice about it because she was so well read and so well educated. Now, one of the other things that was really interesting about her is she's really kind of the model for the first suffragette, pushing for women's rights and equality all the way prior to the Revolution. Yeah. So that is our story of
our sweet story. Okay. So, but love can also be kind of sad.
Yeah, and this one is really quite sad. It's about Andrew and Rachel Jackson.
Oh, another president. Okay.
Another president.
Yeah.
So Rachel Jackson was married to someone else first. And she had been told by the husband at that time that she was divorced. Right?
Which that's unheard of back in the day.
Actually, it was the first divorce in Tennessee history.
Holy smokes. Okay.
Right? But he actually hadn't finished the divorce. She and Andrew Jackson had met and fell in love, and they got married.
While she's still married.
Ooh,
okay.
So the marriage was voided.
Yep.
And she was labeled an adulteress. All right.
The Scarlet Letter.
Yeah. And the poor thing about this is she was very shy, quiet lady. She never wanted to be in the spotlight or anything like that.
Now, Andrew Jackson was not. He
loved
boisterous and loud, and obviously was a politician, one of our presidents.
Yeah. Now, he runs for presidency first in 1824.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1824, we have had this era of good feelings, and political parties have kind of waned away, and there's just one big political party. So what divided the candidates for presidency was really by regions.
Okay.
So there was a candidate from the west of the Appalachians, one from the northeast, and one from the south. And there was Andrew Jackson, who was a famous war general and really had name recognition across the country. And he's the one we talked about last week at the Battle of New Orleans.
Right.
So he runs for election and he gets the most votes, but he doesn't have a majority.
So with the Electoral College, that's how it works. You need to have a majority regardless of who gets the most.
Right. And so what happened was, if they don't have a majority, it goes to Congress to decide.
Okay.
Well, one of the other candidates, a man named Henry Clay, was the Speaker of the House, and he got the fewest amount of electoral votes. So he bows out of it and sees his opportunity to be the kingmaker.
Okay.
And so he puts all his influence behind the number 2 candidate, which was John Quincy Adams, John Adams' son.
Right.
And he gets enough of the votes to push it through, and John Quincy Adams becomes the 6th president of the United States.
So from behind the scenes, he basically creates the president.
Right. Now, he was not somebody who did something for nothing.
Sure.
So what Henry Clay wanted was the stepping stone to become the president back then was the Secretary of State.
Okay.
And Jefferson was a Secretary of State, Madison, Monroe, John Quincy Adams, all secretaries of state.
I see where this is going. You do something for me, I do something for you.
And that's exactly what he got, is he got to be the Secretary of State. Well, Andrew Jackson was pissed off beyond belief, called this the corrupt bargain, and that's how it's labeled in history today, is the corrupt bargain. Jackson wasn't going to stop. He decides that he's going to run in 1828, but now we see 2 factions.
Okay.
We see the Democratic Republican Party, which was the old party, and then we have now the new Democratic Party. And this is, Andrew Jackson is going to be the first candidate for the Democratic Party, and that's the party today. Now, they sit differently on the political spectrum, but that's a whole nother lesson.
Sure.
All right. So, election of 1828, he wins in a landslide. Okay. But during the mudslinging leading up to the election, Henry Clay finds out about the marriage.
I think where this is the love story turned sad.
Yeah. And so in national newspapers and stuff, she gets labeled an adulteress, but they even use the word whore to describe her in some newspapers.
Yeah.
And thinking in the early 1820s to use
like
that
it
word.
Is now. Yeah, exactly. Ooh.
So it just crushes her.
Because she's a private person anyways.
Yeah, and she actually dies right after the election.
Wow.
And so Andrew Jackson goes to Washington by himself, and he really only had one regret in life that he said when he was dying.
And what was that regret?
That he didn't kill Henry Clay himself.
Excellent.
That was the one thing he wished he had done throughout his life. And he had participated in duels. He had been a soldier in the war.
Yeah.
I had no doubt that he would have done it.
He would have seen it through. So, all right. So that we talked about a sweet story and a sad story. Love can also be kind of spicy and exciting. What's a spicy and exciting couple that we have?
So we're going to jump about 80 years ahead to the early 1930s. And when we look at the early 1930s, we think about gangsters. Thank you. And when we think about gangsters, the most famous gangster couple is Bonnie and Clyde.
Bonnie and Clyde. Perfect.
So they met when they were 19 and 20. Bonnie was 19, he's 20. And both of them grew up in Texas. And actually, Bonnie was already married, but her husband was in jail and was going to be in jail for like 10 years or something like that. So she was doing what she wanted to do. Clyde had been in jail since he was little, in and out of jail constantly. So the two of them, they spent most of their time robbing small stores, like groceries and that kind of stuff, or five and dimes, that kind of stuff, and gas stations. Now, they will then become famous for robbing banks, but it's because they get in so many gunfights.
I was gonna say, it was also too the amount that they've done. That was just they were on a spree. So,
Yeah. And the spree was all the way from Texas, all the way north to Minnesota, all the way east to Indiana.
Yeah.
So they were all over the place. And they had hideouts in different places at different times, like in Missouri and Louisiana and Texas and stuff.
Now, there's also too, there's actually a psychology term, hybrid stophilia, which is basically the excitement from doing illegal acts, from doing things.
And modern psychologists and psychiatrists have analyzed the two of them, and they say that she had that, and that was her draw to him, and she really enjoyed that. Exactly. Yes. Now, when we look at the number of people that Clive killed on his own, he killed 9 officers of the law and 4 civilians.
Okay.
All right. Their weapon of choice. Now, this was in the good old days when you could buy any gun you wanted.
Right.
And so their weapon of choice was the Browning automatic rifle,
which is a big rifle.
Yeah, it's a support weapon for the infantry at that time.
Okay.
It's a 30 caliber bullet. It fires semi-automatic, and it does damage. Compared to the gun we think of during that time that the gangs used and stuff like that.
Because this is following the Roaring 20s, right? In the 1930s. This is the time of Prohibition, the time of Elliot Ness and everything too. So we think of the Tommy gun is what I think of.
But when you compare the two, the Tommy gun uses a 45 caliber pistol bullet.
Yeah.
Compared to a 30 caliber full metal jacketed bullet, which can go through the car door.
Gotcha.
The 45 doesn't go through the car door.
Well, the only thing too, that was a big, heavy rifle.
Yes. They weigh about 20 pounds.
Yeah.
And the story goes that Bonnie loved to go into the banks, one in each hand. Now, these things weigh 20 pounds. Yeah. So that's 40 pounds. She weighed about 90 pounds.
She was a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, I just picture either of my daughters with 2 Brownings in their hands.
Now, one of the things too, so when they went and they had this spree where they were doing all this stuff, one of the things that they did though was they kidnapped a lot, wasn't it?
Yes. And it seemed like everywhere they went into a grocery store, if there was any police around, they grabbed somebody and they kidnapped them.
Gotcha.
Now, the funny part about it is, so they would take them with them and then they would drop them off somewhere. But many times they gave them money to get back to wherever they came from.
Nice. So they were nice.
I guess
a little bit. Okay, exactly.
Now, the 2 of them, they die together in a blaze of glory.
Sure.
All right, in Louisiana. There's a really good movie that you can watch called Highwaymen that's on Netflix, and it's with
Woody Harrelson and Kevin Costner.
Yeah, and they play 2 retired Texas Rangers who are sent to hunt them down.
Gotcha.
Now, there was tons of rewards out for finding them, right? At the time, it was somewhere close to about $26,000, right?
Okay. Which is a lot back in the 30s.
Yeah, and so they're found to be in Louisiana.
Okay.
Right? So they're hid out in like the bayou somewhere where there's only one road in, one road out.
Gotcha.
And so what's going to happen is they're going to draw them out and they're going to ambush them. And it's like 12 officers with Tommy guns and shotguns and pistols, right? When they finally get them into their trap, we think about the use of force today. This was excessive use of force. The automobile that they were in was a 1934 Ford Deluxe V8.
It's a big car.
Fast, heavy too. Yeah. They counted 112 bullet holes into the car.
And that's just the ones that hit the car.
Right.
So, okay.
Of that, roughly about a quarter of them hit one or the other, or both.
Yeah.
So the coroner said that Clyde had 17 entry wounds, including one that severed his spine, right? Bonnie had 26 bullet wounds.
They were really after her.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, needless to say, they died together, and you can still go and see. I couldn't remember the name of it, but there's a casino in Nevada that has the car on display and has supposedly the shirt that Clyde wore when he got killed too.
Full of holes.
Full of
Full of
holes.
holes, I'm sure. So
Now, I told you guys that there was a lot of rewards out.
Yeah.
All right. These 12 lawmen, roughly, after they were able to collect what rewards they could, because most of them were like, oh, they're dead. We're
too
not
bad,
paying.
too bad, we're done. Yeah.
They got a whopping $200.23 each for all their hard work and chasing them down and all that kind of stuff. So that's Bonnie and Clyde, and they really go out in this blaze of glory, and they have a quite fiery relationship.
Fiery, spicy, exciting relationship. So, well, we've got that. We talked about how love is sweet and sad and spicy. Love can also be funny.
Yeah.
So what do we have that's a funny couple?
So at the same time, we go and we see that there is such a transition in media.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And the couple that I want to talk about is George Burns and Gracie Allen. All right. And George and Gracie are end up getting married, but they start off in vaudeville.
Which vaudeville was like the original entertainment show.
Yeah.
So.
Go watch the Muppet Show.
Yes.
All right. So the two of them, they play it where George is the straight guy and Gracie plays the term that I found that they used back then was called the dumb Dora character.
Okay.
All right.
Kind of ditzy.
Yeah. And so so that was the role she played.
Now she was anything but that.
Correct.
Yeah.
She was sharp as a whip and could keep up with them. And actually, what they began to find was that when she would do the straight lines, thank you, they would get the most laughs.
Okay.
So they began switching back and forth in their role. And for the woman to be the straight character in the skits was kind of unheard of.
And this is now back in like the 1930s?
Mid-20s.
Mid-20s, okay.
Right? Now, this is also when film is coming out. And so they are going to also go and do film. And they do a couple little movies here and there, but what they really did early on were called one-reel comedies.
Okay.
And so this was just one reel of film. And George wrote the
usually
scripts,
about what, like 20 minutes?
Maybe.
Okay.
And so I think that it would go in between maybe two feature movies,
Gotcha.
So that you could see some shorts or whatever in there. And so he wrote them, and then they acted in some of them, but they had a lot of other actors and actresses that would go on to become more famous in there. And so they did some of that film, but their really big film break was being in the movie Damsel in Distress with Fred Astaire, where this was one of the few movies in the 1930s that Fred Astaire does not have Ginger Rogers as his love interest in the movie. So
they really shine as a couple.
Correct. And there's another girl who's the love interest, but I can't remember her name. But on the billing, it was Fred Astaire, and then them, and then the title. So that was a big step up for them. And that gets them a lot of recognition where they then get put onto radio. And CBS at the time had what was called the Big Broadcast. And it was this big musical comedy. And they became a regular on that, which was really great for them because here they are in all these different medias.
Yeah.
Well,
they did it all. Like I said, they in vaudeville, you danced, you sang, you acted, you told jokes. So I mean, it was they were the whole package.
Yeah, exactly. And so eventually they're going to go on and they're going to get their own TV show. And it's the George and Gracie show. Mm-hmm. And it runs from 1950 to 1958. And they were slotted initially on the Monday night.
Okay.
But then in 1953, there's this other TV show that comes out.
And it comes out and it's on right before them, right?
Correct.
And what show is that?
And that's I Love Lucy.
Oh, my goodness.
So that became 2 half-hour comedies that were like quintessential for you to watch because Lucille Ball became the hottest thing out there. And so they did it as a sketch humor.
Yep.
And did it as if they were in their house, and they had other characters to come in.
But the amazing thing too is it was always the two of them together. It was never George by himself or Gracie by herself. It was always them as a couple.
Yeah. Come 1958, Gracie decides, I want to be done.
Yeah.
She had spent, really 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s working night and day. They had children that they had adopted.
Mhm.
And so she wanted to be a mom and be at home. And she loved gardening and she wanted to do that. So she decides that it's time for her to leave.
Okay.
And George is, during that time, had some heart attacks and other medical complications. And so he goes and he does it one more year, but it's not very successful. And
the two of them kind of fade out of the limelight.
Yeah, unfortunately, she dies in the mid 60s.
Yep.
And we see George. This is when we got to meet him as the old guy with the cigar, making his one-liners as God.
As God, and that was at back in the 70s and early 80s.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
Now, as I was researching them, they had tons of one-liners, and so I wrote down some that I wanted to share that I thought were great. So this one comes from Gracie, and she said, "My mind works so fast. When I think of something, I say it. Lots of times, I say it even before I think of it. And when I think of a lot of people in my life, that's how they are, especially my students. They think before, or they
think.
Exactly. The other one, for all of you who are into politics, I think this says it all. A platform is something a candidate stands for and voters fall for."
Interesting.
And then the final one is from George. And George says, "Someone who makes you laugh is a comedian. Someone who makes you think and then you laugh is a humorist. Someone who doesn't make you laugh is a singer."
Very good.
But thinking about that humorous idea, you know, those best jokes are the ones where you hit to get them.
And the next generation is the George Carlins, the other things that really drive that.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. So that was our When Love is Funny. So we talked about sweet, we talked about sad, spicy, funny. Sometimes love is just about two people or two beings being drawn together. So what two beings have been drawn together? So
we're going to end with probably the most famous couple in the world in the 20th century. And that's going to be Mickey and Minnie Mouse.
Excellent.
So the two of them together.
They're absolutely drawn together.
Exactly. Yep. The two of them were, the first short they were in together was in 1928. And that was the Steamboat Willie. Which is the famous first one that we really saw. First one with sound. Correct. Yep. And they have over 102 shorts together that they were in. And there's all different kinds of them, where a lot of times Mickey is rescuing Minnie and stuff from from Pete and all those kind of things. But they've been a couple now for 94 years. Wow. And they have stayed the test of time because they keep coming back with each generation in different iterations of them in the shorts like in the 30s and 40s. Yeah. Then they did the Mickey Mouse Club, and we see them become those characters portrayed by individuals. Then we're going to see that we see live movies again and TV shows with the Disney Channel. And so they're just going to be this iconic couple that kind of really shows that love. Did they have any historical basis in when obviously Walt Disney was the creator of that? So it's interesting because as I was reading, one place that I read said that partially their relationship was modeled after Walt Disney's and his wife Lillian. And Lillian didn't want to have really anything to do with the limelight and stuff like that. When they were first starting to become famous, or Disney was, it was at the same time that Charles Lindbergh's child was kidnapped and was killed. And she was afraid that other individuals might copycat this with other rising individuals, and that their two daughters that they had could be the victim of that. So she kept the family really out of the limelight. Very little about them was ever shown on television and stuff like that. With the exception of them being the model for Mickey and Minnie Mouse. So, correct. Excellent. So, wow. So, I mean, that was a great little look at some different types of love through history and through what we've done. What do we have going on next week? Okay. So next week, our drink is going to be Navy Grog, which is one of the cocktails here at the Bahi Hut. Correct. And what we're going to be doing with that is we're going to be looking at the U.S. Navy, but we're going to be looking at it from the perspective here in Florida. Specifically, Key West, and Fort Jefferson in the dry Tortugas.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So sounds fantastic. So thank you for joining us tonight on this Valentine's Day night. We're going to share our last little sip of our Volcano Bowl together. Oh, you got stuck in there.
Yeah. All right.
Take a little bit more. So, all right, guys, we look forward to seeing you next week. Happy Valentine's Day. And we'll talk about it next week.
All right.
Thanks for joining us.
See you.